My husband told his mother, "She's too weak to fight back now. We can take everything." I heard it all through the door. I stayed silent and pretended nothing changed. 2 weeks later, a lawyer knocked on their door. When they opened the envelope, my husband's face went white and his mother collapsed, because what they saw inside meant, "Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin." The words reached me before I turned the corner, carried on the still air of the hallway. I stopped, the china tray balanced on my palms, growing heavy with its burden. The teapot, the 2 cups, the small bowl of sugar cubes. It was Gregory's study door, left open a precise 2 inches. A slice of yellow light cut across the dark Persian runner. His voice, so familiar, was stripped of its usual performative warmth. It was a tone of cold, efficient planning. "It's the only logical move, Mother." A pause. The clink of a glass, ice against crystal. His evening scotch. "Sentiment has no place in this." "I've been saying it for years," Eleanor's voice answered, sharp with vindication. She was always a weight, a quiet, pretty accessory that has lost its shine. But the house, Gregory, the property, we must be practical. I did not breathe. The floral pattern on the teacup seemed to blur before my eyes. "The lake house is the real asset," Gregory said, and I could picture him leaning back in his leather chair, the picture of reasoned triumph. "It's in both our names, yes, but the initial funds came from my bonuses. I'll argue that. My contributions. The joint accounts are straightforward. I'll initiate a transfer to the new corporate holding account next week. She never looks at the statements." A cold knot formed in my stomach, dense and precise. Eleanor made a sound of approval. And her own inheritance? That miserable little plot with the cottage? Still in her name. Premarital, but she's let it decay. I'll have a valuation done, argue it's a financial drain, offer a buyout for a fraction. She'll be so overwhelmed, she'll sign anything just to make it stop. Good, clean, and she is agreeable? Eleanor's question was a clinical probe. Gregory's exhale was a puff of dismissal. "Victoria, she's too weak to fight back now. She's spent 20 years avoiding conflict. She'll be hurt, of course. There might be tears. A bit of silence. But she'll accept a reasonable settlement. She just wants peace. She doesn't have the spine for a battle." "Too weak to fight back," Eleanor echoed, not as a question but as a confirmed fact. In that moment, a peculiar clarity descended. The cold knot dissolved, replaced by a void of absolute stillness. The pain was there, a distant throb, but it was compartmentalized instantly, filed away. His words were not a shock. They were a key, turning in a lock I had pretended did not exist. The condescension at dinner parties when I offered an opinion. The way he'd patted my hand after I suggested a financial advisor. The slow, systematic erosion of my confidence framed as protective concern. It was not anger that filled the void. It was recognition. I looked down at the tray. The tea would be steeped past its ideal point, bitter. I took one silent step backward, then another. My movements were fluid, automatic. I turned and walked to the kitchen, my heels making no sound on the runner. The overhead light was bright, clinical. I set the tray on the granite counter. The china made a soft, definitive click. I poured the oversteeped tea down the sink. I watched the amber liquid swirl and disappear. I rinsed the pot, washed the single cup I would use for myself, and placed it on the drying rack. I wiped the counter until it shone. Each action was deliberate, a ritual of quiet severance. Later, I heard them in the hall. Gregory's laugh was back, the charming one. "Victoria! Oh, she must have gotten distracted with her gardening notes. She's probably forgotten all about us." I stood in the dark living room, looking out at the moonlit patio. My reflection in the glass was a ghostly outline. I did not feel like a ghost. I felt like a schematic, a blueprint being redrawn. too weak to fight back. The assumption was his fundamental error. He mistook stillness for absence. He confused silence with emptiness. I went upstairs before they could find me. In the bedroom we shared, I sat at the small writing desk I used for paying household bills. I opened my laptop. I did not open our bank account. I did not look at property records. Not yet. Instead, I opened a blank document. At the top, I typed a date and time. Then I began to write. I recorded the conversation verbatim as I had heard it. I noted the tone, the specific phrases, wait, lost its shine, too weak to fight back. I described the tray in my hands, the slice of light, the clink of ice in his glass. I wrote without emotion, as a court stenographer would. It was a transcript of the moment my marriage ended. When I was finished, I saved the file not on the computer, but to a small, encrypted flash drive I had not used in years. I removed the drive and held it in my palm. It was cool and solid. This was not a weapon, not yet. It was a first piece of evidence, the first step in a process he believed me incapable of undertaking. I heard his footsteps on the stairs. I closed the laptop and slipped the drive into the pocket of my cardigan. By the time the bedroom door opened, I was standing by the window looking out at the night. "There you are," Gregory said. His voice was soft, a counterfeit warmth. "Everything all right? Mother said you never brought the tea." I turned to face him. I allowed my features to settle into their usual placid arrangement, a small, tired smile. "I'm sorry. I had a headache coming on. I thought I'd lie down for a moment. I must have forgotten all about the tea." He crossed the room and kissed my forehead, a practiced gesture. "You work too hard in that garden. You should rest. It's not good to overexert yourself." "You're probably right," I said, my voice a quiet murmur. I looked at him, truly looked. I saw the confidence in his eyes, the utter lack of suspicion. He saw exactly what he expected to see. His wife, a little weary, a little forgetful, eager for peace. "Get some sleep," he said, already turning toward his side of the closet. I nodded. "I will. Good night, Gregory." As I prepared for bed, moving through the motions of brushing my hair and applying cream, my mind was not on the room. It was already elsewhere. It was in a lawyer's office I had never visited. It was pulling files from a safe deposit box I had not opened in a decade. It was calculating timelines and strategies. The hurt was a sealed room inside me. The woman moving in the mirror was someone new. She was a quiet woman with gray in her hair, and she had just decided to go to war. And her greatest advantage was that the enemy was already celebrating a victory that had not yet occurred. The alarm chimed at 6:30, as it did every weekday. I opened my eyes and saw the same ceiling, the same pale light filtering through the blinds. Gregory slept on his side, his breathing even. For a moment, I simply lay there, cataloging the new reality. The hurt was a patient, quiet thing in a locked room inside me. It did not throb, it simply existed. My mind, however, was awake and clear. I moved through the morning with practiced precision. The shower, the lotion, the selection of a soft sweater and trousers. I stood before the mirror and brushed my hair, watching the silver strands catch the light. I applied a minimal amount of makeup, enough to look refreshed. My hands were steady. In the kitchen, I measured coffee and water. I set 2 places at the breakfast nook. I scrambled eggs, toasted bread. The domestic symphony was a script I knew by heart, and now I performed it with a new purpose, to provide no hint of deviation. He entered the kitchen, already dressed for work, his phone in his hand. "Morning," he said, not looking up from the screen. "Good morning," I replied, my voice pleasant and light. I set his plate before him. "The Johnson account review is today, isn't it?" He glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. I usually asked about his day later, over dinner. "Yes, the quarterly figures. Should be straightforward." He took a bite of egg. "You remembered." "You mentioned it last week," I said, pouring orange juice. It was true. I had made a note of it, part of the old habit of tracking his life to better support it. That habit now had a different application. I was gathering data. I hope it goes well. He gave a distracted nod, his attention back on his phone. It will. It's just a formality. I ate my own breakfast watching him. I observed the slight tension in his jaw as he scanned an email, the way he tapped his finger against the table. Signs of stress I had learned to soothe. I did not soothe them today. I merely noted them. "Your mother called yesterday," I said, sipping my coffee. "She's thinking of coming by this afternoon. Something about fabric samples for her new condo." He waved a hand. "Just let her in. You know how she is with her redecorating phases. Humor her." "Of course," I said. He finished his breakfast, stood, and brushed a perfunctory kiss on my cheek. "Don't overdo it in the garden. It's supposed to rain later." "I'll be careful," I said. The door closed behind him. The house settled into its daytime silence. I cleared the plates, washed them, and wiped down the counter. Then I did not go to the garden. I went to the small room off the kitchen that was designated as my office. A desk, a filing cabinet, a bookshelf of gardening manuals and old novels. I sat down. From the top drawer, I took out a fresh, unlined notebook. On the first page, I wrote a single word: inventory. I started with the obvious. The things he knew I knew. Our joint checking and savings accounts at First Mercantile. The investment portfolio managed by his firm's preferred advisor. The title to this house, with both our names. I wrote down account numbers I had memorized from a lifetime of bill paying, last recorded balances from statements I had filed away. Then, I began a second list. This one was longer, and it existed primarily in my memory and in documents he rarely considered. My inherited property, the lake house, and the 3 acres of land. It was not in decay. I had paid the property taxes from a separate, personal account for 22 years. I had a folder, thick with receipts for maintenance, insurance payments, utility bills. He had signed many of the checks early on, then lost interest. I had continued the management alone. There was the small brokerage account in my name only, funded with modest gifts from my late aunt. He thought it was a trivial thing, a hobby account. It was not. There was my education, a master's degree in archival research I had never used professionally. He had called it a lovely intellectual pursuit when we met. Later, it became a nice story from your past. The skills from that pursuit, methodical organization, forensic attention to detail, source verification, were not stories. They were tools. I opened the filing cabinet. I began to remove folders, not all at once, but a few at a time. I made neat stacks on the desk: bank statements, tax returns, property deeds, insurance policies. I did not examine them deeply yet. I was surveying the battlefield. At noon, Eleanor arrived. I heard her key in the lock. She had insisted on having one years ago, and her crisp footsteps in the hall. "Victoria, I'm here." I closed the notebook and slid it into the desk drawer. I placed the stacks of folders back into the cabinet and turned the key. By the time she reached the kitchen doorway, I was standing at the sink, rinsing a cup. "Eleanor." "Hello." She carried a large bag from an expensive fabric showroom. Her eyes, sharp as ever, scanned the room, looking for disorder, for change. She found none. "Gregory said you were expecting me." "I was. Can I get you some tea?" "Too much caffeine this morning," she said, dismissing the offer. She laid out several swatches of silk on the kitchen table. "I need a second opinion. The emerald or the sapphire blue for the draperies. The view is of the golf course, so it needs a certain sophistication." I approached the table. I looked at the fabrics. I had learned long ago that my opinion was merely a formality. She would choose the opposite. "The blue is striking," I said, keeping my tone neutral. It is, but it's perhaps a bit cold. The emerald has warmth." She looked at me, her gaze assessing. "You look tired, Victoria. Are you sleeping?" The concern was a blade, carefully honed. "Well enough. The garden is coming to life. It's a busy season." "You always bury yourself in that dirt," she said, gathering the swatches. "It's good you have a quiet hobby. It suits you." She said it as one might say, "It's good you have a small, manageable pet." "It's peaceful," I agreed. She stayed for another 20 minutes, speaking mostly of her condo, of Gregory's recent professional successes, of her friends' children who were achieving more. I nodded at the appropriate intervals. I asked polite questions. I played my part. When she left, the house felt different. Her presence had been a pollutant, a reminder of the conspiracy that lived within these walls. I returned to my desk. I did not open the filing cabinet. I opened my laptop instead. I conducted a series of deliberate, anonymous searches. I looked for family law practices in the city. I read biographies of attorneys, focusing not on flashy marketing, but on credentials, years of experience, areas of specialization. I looked for words like equitable distribution, financial fraud, premarital asset protection. I took no notes on the computer. I wrote names and firms in my notebook with a pencil. One name appeared with consistent respect in professional forums, not sensational reviews: Evelyn Reed, of Reed and Associates. Her biography stated a 40-year career, a focus on high-net-worth matrimonial law, and a reputation for thorough strategic litigation. There was a photograph, a black woman with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that looked directly at the camera. She did not smile. She assessed. I closed the laptop. The afternoon light was fading, and a light rain had begun, just as Gregory predicted. I sat in the quiet room and considered my next move. To engage a lawyer was to cross a threshold. It would make the war real in a way my private notes did not. I felt no fear, only a calculating chill. I reviewed my lists. I thought of his voice through the door. Too weak to fight back. He was wrong. I was not fighting yet. I was preparing. And preparation, I had always believed, was the foundation of any successful endeavor. The woman who had organized his life, who had managed complex households and social calendars and hidden the mechanics of it all from view, was now organizing her own liberation. It felt strangely like coming home to a skill I had misplaced. I was not yet in motion, but I was poised. And for now, the poise was enough. The performance of normalcy would continue, but behind the scenes, the stage was being rebuilt, board by silent board. The following Tuesday, I told Gregory I had a dentist appointment. He nodded without looking up from his newspaper. "Try to get the early slot. I have a conference call at 11. "I already did," I said, my tone agreeable. The lie was simple, clean. I had made the actual call to Reed and Associates 2 days prior from the landline in my office while he was at work. The receptionist's voice had been efficient, not overly warm. I'd given my name and said I needed a consultation regarding estate planning and asset protection, a matter of some urgency. They had an opening Tuesday at 9:15. I wore a navy blue dress, simple but well-tailored, with a single strand of pearls. I applied my usual makeup. I looked like a woman going to a routine dental cleaning or perhaps a slightly formal meeting. I drove myself, taking the route I would have taken to my actual dentist. Then, at a specific intersection, I turned left instead of right. The law offices were in a quiet, brick-faced building downtown, not one of the glass towers. It spoke of established success, not flashy ambition. The lobby was quiet, carpeted in a deep burgundy. The directory listed Reed and Associates on the 4th floor. The elevator doors opened directly into a small, serene waiting area. A wall of legal books bound in dark leather stood behind a polished mahogany desk. A young woman with glasses looked up. "Good morning. Can I help you?" "Victoria Benson. I have a 9:15 appointment with Ms. Reed." "Of course. Please have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." I sat in a leather armchair. I did not fidget. I placed my purse and the small, structured tote bag I had brought on the floor beside me. Inside the tote was my notebook, a selection of the most critical documents from my filing cabinet, and the flash drive. I waited exactly 4 minutes. The inner door opened, and Evelyn Reed stood there. She was taller than her photo suggested, and her presence filled the doorway. She wore a charcoal gray suit. Her gaze found me immediately, and she gave a brief professional nod. "Mrs. Benson, I'm Evelyn Reed. Please come in." Her office was a larger version of the waiting area. Bookshelves, a large desk, a seating area with 2 armchairs facing a small sofa. A window looked out over a park. It was a room designed for concentration, for serious conversation. She gestured to one of the armchairs. "Please sit. Can I offer you water or coffee?" "No, thank you." I sat, my posture straight but not rigid. I placed my tote bag on my lap. She took the chair opposite me, crossing her legs. She held a plain legal pad and a pen. "My receptionist said you mentioned estate planning. Is this regarding a will? Trusts?" I took a slow breath. This was the threshold. Once I crossed it, there was no returning to the fiction of my marriage. "That was the pretext," I said, my voice even. "The actual matter is more immediate. I need to initiate divorce proceedings, and I need to take preventive legal action before my husband does." Ms. Reed's expression did not change. She simply set down her pad. "Go on." 8 days ago, I overheard my husband, Gregory, and his mother, Eleanor, planning to systematically drain our joint accounts, claim my premarital inherited property as a marital asset, and leave me with a minimal, coercive settlement. His stated assumption was that I am too weak to fight back. I relayed the facts as I had recorded them, without embellishment. I mentioned the tea tray, the slice of light under the door, the specific phrases they had used. "Do you have any evidence of this conversation? A recording? A witness?" "I have a contemporaneous memorandum. I wrote down the entire conversation in detail as soon as I left the hallway. I recorded the date, time, and specific wording. I saved it to a secure drive. I opened my tote and retrieved the flash drive, placing it on the small table between us. I also have documentation of the assets in question and a pattern of financial management that I believe demonstrates my sole stewardship of the inherited property." Ms. Reed picked up the flash drive, examined it, and set it back down. "A memo you wrote yourself is helpful for establishing your state of mind and your narrative, but its value as independent evidence is limited. We would need to corroborate the intent. Do you have access to bank statements? Can you show any preparatory moves on his part?" "I have complete records of all joint accounts for the past 15 years. I have all tax returns. I have the original deed to my lake property, along with 22 years of tax receipts, insurance invoices, and maintenance records paid from an account he has not accessed in over a decade. I have a list of his recent bonuses, which he claims funded the house, but I have records showing those bonuses were deposited into a different investment vehicle." I opened my notebook to the inventory pages and handed it to her. She took it and read in silence for a full minute, her eyes scanning the neat columns of figures and notes. She flipped a page. Then she looked up at me. Her gaze was assessing, but it held a new quality: recognition. "This is exceptionally organized. I have a background in archival research. Detail and verification are habitual." A slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Good. Habitual is what we need." She leaned forward slightly. "Mrs. Benson, what is your primary objective? Financially, personally?" I had expected the question. I had prepared the answer. "My primary objective is to secure full and clear title to my inherited property. Secondary, to receive an equitable share of the true marital assets, not the diminished version he plans to offer. Tertiary, to prevent him from dissipating joint assets before the filing. Personally, my objective is a clean, swift, and legally definitive separation. I do not want a prolonged battle. I want a surgical one." Ms. Reed allowed herself a small, tight smile. It was not warm, but it was approving. "A surgical one. I can work with that. The first step is to file a motion for a temporary restraining order to freeze the joint accounts and prohibit the transfer or sale of any property. Given the evidence of expressed intent, we have grounds. We will also file a LI's pendants on the marital home and your lake property, clouding the title so neither can be sold. We will do this under seal initially. He should not see it coming." The words were precise, tactical. They were the translation of my cold resolve into the language of the law. "When can this be done?" "I will need certified copies of the deeds and the most recent financial statements. Can you get those without raising suspicion?" "Yes, he is at his office from 8 to 6. I have full access." "Good. Bring them to me by Thursday. I will have the motions drafted and ready to file by Friday afternoon. Once they are filed with the court, he will be served. The process will begin." She paused. "He believes you are weak. That is our advantage. You must continue your normal routine exactly as you have. Do not change a single habit. His arrogance is the crack in his armor." "I understand. There's one more thing," she said, her voice lowering a degree. "This memo, you wrote it yourself. From this moment on, do not create any new documents without discussing it with me first. All communication regarding this matter should be through my office on secure channels. Do not use your home email or phone for anything related to this case. Do you have a mobile phone he does not monitor?" "I have one. He considers it an old hobby phone. He never checks it." "Use that. My card has my direct line and a secure email address." She handed me a plain white card with black embossed lettering. "From now on, I am your attorney. My role is to advocate for your interests within the legal system. Your role is to be the calm, predictable wife he expects. Can you do that?" I looked at the card, then back at her steady gaze. "I have been doing it for 20 years, Ms. Reed. I am proficient." For the first time, her smile reached her eyes, just briefly. "I believe you are. Bring me those documents on Thursday. We'll start the machinery." I stood, gathering my bag and notebook. She walked me to the door. As I stepped back into the quiet waiting area, the weight I had carried since that night in the hallway did not feel lighter. It felt different. It was no longer a secret burden. It was a shared strategy. The void inside me was now filled with a grid of actions, dates, and legal terms. I drove to a shopping center near my actual dentist, bought a new toothbrush and toothpaste, and kept the receipt. I returned home at exactly 11:20. Gregory's conference call, I knew, often ran late. The house was empty and silent. I went to my office, unlocked the filing cabinet, and began selecting the specific documents Ms. Reed had requested. I worked methodically, without rush. The performance of normalcy would continue. But now, behind the scenes, I had an ally. The first move had been made, not with a shout, but with a quiet consultation in a book-lined room. The war was no longer a private blueprint. It was a docket number, waiting to be assigned. The documents Miss Reed requested were not in one place. They were a trail, scattered across 20 years of married life, and retrieving them without triggering any alarm required a schedule. I created one. On Wednesday morning, after Gregory left, I drove to the county recorder's office. I wore sunglasses and a hat, a simple precaution. I requested certified copies of the deed to our marital home and to the lake property. The clerk was efficient. I paid with cash from the household grocery fund. The documents, bearing the official seal, went into a plain folder and then into my tote bag. I was back home by 10:30 in time to put a chicken in the oven for dinner. That afternoon, I told Gregory I was meeting a friend from the gardening club for coffee. He nodded, already distracted by a golf tournament on television. I drove to the Central Library instead. In a quiet carrel on the 3rd floor, I used the public computers. I accessed the online portals for our joint banking and investment accounts. I did not log in from home. I printed 3 months of statements for each account on the library's printer, feeding coins into the machine. The soft hum of the printer was the only sound. I compiled the pages, my hands steady. This was research. It felt familiar, like the long-ago days in university archives, piecing together narratives from fragments. On Thursday morning, I visited my safe deposit box at the bank downtown. I had not opened it in over 5 years. Gregory had asked about it once, early on. I'd told him it held my mother's jewelry and some old family papers. He had never asked again. The box contained more. The original faded deed to the lake property, signed by my grandfather. The will of my aunt, bequeathing me the funds that had seeded my separate brokerage account. A portfolio of savings bonds, maturing at different dates, that I had purchased over the years with money from freelance proofreading work he had considered a nice little distraction. I photographed each document with my old mobile phone, the one he never saw. Then I placed the originals back in the box, along with the newly certified deeds. The metal door closed with a solid, satisfying thunk. The most delicate part was the financial ledger. For years, I had maintained a simple spreadsheet on my laptop, tracking household expenses, charitable donations, even the costs of his mother's frequent gifts and visits. It was a habit born from a desire for order, but also from a silent need to know where the money went. He had laughed at it once, calling it adorably meticulous. I had smiled and kept updating it. Now I created a new file on the encrypted flash drive. I exported the data from the household ledger. Then I began a separate, more critical log. I cross-referenced deposit records from his annual bonuses against major household purchases and investments. I created a timeline showing that the funds used for the down payment on our home came from the sale of my previous condo, a fact he had verbally acknowledged years ago but had never documented. I compiled every invoice I had ever paid for the lake property: a new roof, plumbing repairs, tree removal, property taxes. The total sum was significant. It represented not just money, but consistent, sole responsibility. I worked on this late into the night after Gregory was asleep. The glow of my laptop screen was a small island of light in the dark house. The keys made soft, rhythmic clicks. I did not feel tired. I felt focused. Each cell filled, each hyperlink created, each PDF attached was a brick in a wall I was building between my old life and my new one. On Thursday afternoon, as scheduled, I returned to Ms. Reed's office. I carried my tote bag, now heavier with paper. I did not go to the dentist first. The pretense was becoming simpler, a costume I put on and took off. Ms. Reed was waiting. She ushered me in and closed the door. Without speaking, I began removing the folders from my bag, placing them in neat stacks on her desk. Certified deeds, bank statements, investment summaries, the printed ledger pages, the flash drive with the updated files. She picked up the stack of property-related invoices first, flipping through the pages. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "You kept all of these." It seemed prudent. Prudent is an understatement. She set them down and picked up the timeline I had created, tracing the flow of funds with her finger. She spent several minutes in silence, examining the documents. Finally, she looked up. "This is comprehensive, more than I usually see at this stage. It changes the posture of the case. This isn't just a response, it's a preemptive strike. We can demonstrate a pattern of separate asset maintenance and his acknowledged but undocumented financial benefit from your premarital resources." "Is it sufficient for the motions?" I asked. "It is more than sufficient. I'll have my paralegal begin drafting immediately. The temporary restraining order and the les pendens will be filed tomorrow. The court clerk is amenable to efficient scheduling." She gave me a look that was all business. "Once they are filed, he will be served at the earliest opportunity, likely early next week. The clock starts then. You understand you must not alter your behavior in any way." "I understand." "Good. There is one other thing, your memo of the conversation. While it's not independent proof, its detail gives us a roadmap. We may use it to guide discovery, to ask very specific questions in deposition. He won't know how we know what we know. That will unnerve him." I nodded. The thought of Gregory unnerved was not a pleasure. It was a tactical objective. I left her office with the empty tote bag. The transfer of documents felt like the passing of a baton. The evidence was no longer mine alone. It was part of a legal strategy. The quiet work in my nighttime office was now formalized. That evening, I made Gregory's favorite meal: rosemary roasted chicken, garlic mashed potatoes, steamed asparagus. The house was filled with the warm, familiar smells of our shared life. He ate with gusto, talking about a difficult client and a colleague's promotion. "This is excellent, Vic," he said, pouring himself a second glass of wine. "You've outdone yourself." "Thank you," I said, cutting a small piece of chicken. "I'm glad you like it." He smiled at me, a smile of pure, uncomplicated satisfaction. He saw a wife who had run her errands, kept her appointments, and cooked a perfect dinner. He saw the surface calm and unbroken. He had no idea that beneath that surface, the foundation of his assumptions had already been excavated, and in its place a case was being constructed, page by page, fact by fact. The ammunition was gathered. The next move was no longer mine to make. It belonged to the law and to the woman who knew how to wield it. The first letter arrived on Tuesday. I saw it on the hall table when I came in from the garden, my hands still dusty from repotting ferns. It was a standard business envelope, but the return address was from the county clerk's office. It was addressed to Gregory Benson. I felt a small, cold click in my chest. The machinery had engaged. I did not touch it. I washed my hands, made a pot of tea, and waited. He found it when he came home. I heard the rustle of paper, then a pause. "County clerk?" he muttered to himself. He tore it open. I was arranging hydrangeas in a vase on the dining table, my back to him. I heard the shift in his breathing, a sharp intake. "What is it?" I asked, turning with a mild expression. "Nothing, just some official notice about property records, probably a bureaucratic error." He folded the letter and shoved it into his briefcase. His tone was dismissive, but his movements were abrupt. "Dinner ready?" "In 20 minutes, I said. That night, after he'd gone to bed, I used my old phone to check the secure email Ms. Reed had set up. There was a single line: "Tro and LP filed today under seal. Service of initial notice to parties initiated. Expect confusion." The confusion manifested the next day. He was distracted at breakfast, checking his phone repeatedly. He left for work early. I knew he would spend the morning trying to decipher the notice, which would have been deliberately couched in dense, procedural language. It would inform him that a les pendens had been filed on 2 properties, but not by whom, and that a related motion was under seal with the family court. It was a legal ghost, present but undefined. On Wednesday, a second envelope came, this one from the court itself. He opened it in his study with the door closed. I stood in the kitchen, chopping vegetables, and listened. There was silence, then the sound of his desk chair rolling back sharply. A few minutes later, he emerged, his face tight. "More paperwork?" I asked, wiping my hands on a towel. "It's nothing. Some administrative nonsense. The court system is impossibly inefficient." He tried to smile, but it was a strained gesture. "I might have to work late tomorrow. Need to sort this out." "Of course," I said. "Should I keep a plate warm for you?" "Don't bother. I'll grab something at the office." He retreated back to his study. I heard the low murmur of his voice. He was on the phone, likely with his own attorney, a corporate lawyer named Fisher who handled his business contracts. I knew Fisher would be out of his depth with family court maneuvers. That was the point. Thursday evening, he did work late. I used the time to call Ms. Reed from the garden on my old phone. "He's received the notices," I said quietly, watching the back door. "He's confused and has contacted his corporate lawyer." "Good. Fisher will have to tell him he needs a family law specialist, which will cost him time and money. The temporary restraining order is in effect as of 4 p.m. today. The joint accounts are frozen. He will discover that when he attempts to access funds. Do not be the one to tell him." "I won't." "Continue your routine. His anxiety is our metric. Let him simmer." I ended the call and deadheaded the roses, my movements calm and deliberate. The thorns caught on my gloves, but I worked around them. He came home just after 9, looking weary and irritated. He went straight to the study and closed the door. I did not disturb him. An hour later, I heard a sharp, frustrated exclamation. I imagined him trying to transfer money, encountering a freeze. The sound was a small, satisfying confirmation. On Friday morning, the facade cracked a little more. He was at the kitchen table, his laptop open, his breakfast untouched. He was typing furiously, then stopping to read something on the screen. His brow was furrowed. "Is everything all right?" I asked, pouring coffee. "It's this property thing. It's more complicated than I thought. Some kind of filing." He looked at me, his eyes searching my face for a clue. "You haven't received anything, have you? Any official mail?" "Just the usual catalogs and charity requests," I said, handing him his cup. "Is it something serious?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, frustration bleeding into his voice. "The language is obtuse, and my accounts, there seems to be a hold. Fisher is looking into it." He said the last part as if trying to convince himself. "I'm sure it will get straightened out," I said, my tone placid. "These things usually do." He stared at me for a long moment as if seeing me anew. I met his gaze with a look of mild, wifely concern. He saw nothing. He sighed and looked back at his screen. "Yeah, I'm sure it will." I left him there, Googling legal terms he didn't understand. I put on my wide-brimmed hat and went to the community garden, my weekly commitment. For 2 hours, I weeded and watered my plot alongside other volunteers. The sun was warm, the conversation light. It was a real place, with real dirt under my nails, far from the silent war in my home. The contrast was grounding. When I returned, he was gone, but the energy in the house was charged, like the air before a storm. I checked my secure email. A new message from Miss Reed. "Fisher has filed a motion for clarification. Standard stalling tactic. We respond Monday. The pressure is applied. Hold steady." I deleted the message. I made myself a salad and ate it at the kitchen counter, listening to the quiet. The web was tightening, just as she had said. He was entangled in a process he couldn't see, couldn't control, and couldn't believe had anything to do with his quiet wife. His confusion was the first sign of unraveling. I finished my meal, washed the plate, and looked out at the backyard. The roses were blooming beautifully. They had thrived under consistent, careful attention. I understood the principle. The Sunday dinner was Eleanor's idea, a weekly tradition she enforced with the rigidity of a military drill. That week, it felt like a staged event, a gathering of actors where only I knew the true script. Gregory had been subdued all weekend, checking his phone compulsively, jumping at notifications. The legal ghost was haunting him. I prepared the meal as I always did: roast beef, Yorkshire pudding, roasted vegetables. The kitchen was filled with the sounds and smells of normalcy. I moved through it with automatic precision, my mind clear. Ms. Reed's last instruction echoed: "Hold steady, observe." They arrived at 6. Eleanor swept in, air-kissing Gregory's cheek and giving me a brief, appraising nod. "Something smells adequate," she said, her version of a compliment. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said, carrying the roast to the dining table. Dinner began with the usual topics: Gregory's work. He gave vague, clipped answers. Eleanor's condo renovations. The weather. I passed dishes, filled water glasses, and contributed polite murmurs. The conversation was a flat surface, and beneath it, currents of tension moved. It was during dessert, a lemon tart I had made from scratch, that Eleanor made her move. She took a small, precise bite and dabbed her lips with her napkin. "This is passable, Victoria. Not too sweet." She set her fork down. I was reviewing the floor plans for the condo again. The master suite is generous, but the guest room is a closet. It really is a space for one. Gregory shifted in his seat, his eyes dropping to his plate. "Perhaps," Eleanor continued, her gaze sliding to me, "it's for the best. Some spaces are simply not meant for permanent occupancy. They become cluttered. It's better to clear them out, redecorate entirely, start fresh with a coherent vision." The subtext was not subtle. She was talking about my home, my place in her son's life. She was measuring for drapes in a house she believed would soon be hers. Gregory cleared his throat. "Mother, now isn't the time." "Nonsense," she said, waving a hand. "Planning is everything, and when one has a clear advantage, one should press it. Don't you agree, Victoria?" She turned her full attention to me, her eyes bright with malicious confidence. She was enjoying this, the slow squeeze, the reminder of my presumed powerlessness. I finished my bite of tart. I placed my fork neatly on the edge of my plate. I looked up and met her gaze directly. I did not speak immediately. I let the silence stretch for a beat, 2 beats. I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, the first crack in her smugness. She expected flinching, demurring, a downcast look. Instead, I allowed a slow, knowing smile to form on my lips. It was not a wide smile. It did not reach my eyes. It was a small, private curve that acknowledged her meaning and dismissed its power. It was the smile of someone holding a royal flush, watching another player bet heavily on a pair of 2s. "I do agree, Eleanor," I said, my voice calm and clear in the quiet room. "Planning is everything, and a clear advantage should never be wasted. It's the foundation of any successful redecorating project." My emphasis on the last 2 words was slight but deliberate. I held her gaze, my smile unwavering. I saw the confidence in her face drain, replaced by a stunned confusion. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. She looked from me to Gregory, seeking an explanation he could not provide. Gregory was staring at me, his fork suspended in midair. "Victoria?" he said, his voice tentative. I turned my smile to him, softening it into something more familiar, more wifely. "Yes, dear? More coffee?" No." He put his fork down. The meal was effectively over. Eleanor recovered somewhat, her spine stiffening. Well, I suppose some people have unconventional ideas about design. Her tone was brittle. She pushed her chair back. "I should be going. I have an early appointment with the fabricator tomorrow." The usual protests and offers of more tea did not come. Gregory stood mechanically. "I'll walk you out." I remained seated. "Good night, Eleanor. Drive safely." She left the dining room without another word. I heard the muted sounds of their conversation in the foyer, his low, anxious murmur, her sharp, questioning tones. I began to clear the table, stacking the plates with my usual care. The lemon tart, half eaten, sat in the center. I covered it with a glass dome. Gregory returned to the doorway. He stood there watching me. I could feel his scrutiny, a new and wary thing. "What was that about?" he asked. "What was what about?" I carried a stack of plates into the kitchen. With my mother, that comment, that smile. I turned on the faucet, the water hitting the stainless steel sink with a loud rush. "I simply agreed with her," I said over the noise. "Planning is important. Was that wrong?" He was silent for a long moment. "No, it wasn't wrong." He sounded unconvinced, troubled. "It just didn't sound like you." I turned off the water and looked at him, my expression one of mild puzzlement. "I'm not sure what you mean. It was just a conversation about redecorating." I held his gaze until he looked away, shaking his head. "Forget it," he muttered. "I'm going to my study. This paperwork is giving me a headache." "Of course," I said. "I'll bring you some aspirin later." He left. I finished cleaning the kitchen. The encounter replayed in my mind, her confusion, his dawning unease. It was a small thing, a smile and a few ambiguous words, but in the context of their conspiracy and his recent legal anxieties, it was a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripples would reach shores they could not yet see. My mask had not slipped. I had merely allowed them a glimpse of the steel beneath its surface. It was the first signal, a silent flare in the dark. They had seen it. And now they would have to wonder what it meant. The calm before the storm was over. The pressure in the air had changed. The morning dawned clear and bright, a perfect spring day. I rose at my usual time. Gregory was already awake, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his phone. The lines around his eyes were deeper than they had been a week ago. The ghost was now a constant companion. "You're up early," I said, my voice soft with morning calm. "Couldn't sleep," he grunted. "More of this damn legal nonsense. Fisher is supposed to get clarification today. I have to be available for his call." "I'm sure it will be resolved soon," I said, moving toward the bathroom. I had already received my own communication from Ms. Reed, timed for 6 a.m. on my secure line. Service confirmed for 11 a.m. today. Be elsewhere. My schedule was already set. Wednesday was my half day at the community garden, a commitment I had never missed. Gregory knew this. It was part of the reliable backdrop of my life. I dressed in my older gardening clothes, sturdy trousers, a faded linen shirt, a wide hat. I packed my canvas bag with shears, trowel, and a water bottle. Downstairs, I prepared a simple breakfast of toast and fruit. Gregory picked at his food, his attention divided between his phone and the window, as if expecting a messenger to appear on the driveway at any moment. "I'll be at the garden until 1 or so," I said, clearing my plate. "The peonies need staking, and the mulch delivery is today." He nodded absently. "Fine, I'll be here, waiting for this call." "Try not to worry," I said, placing a hand briefly on his shoulder. The gesture was automatic, a 20-year habit. He flinched slightly under the touch. I removed my hand and picked up my bag. The drive to the community garden was peaceful. The sun was warm, the traffic light. I parked in my usual spot and walked through the wrought iron gates. The space was a lush contrast to the suburban formality of my neighborhood. Raised beds overflowed with greens and early blooms. The air smelled of damp earth and rosemary. I went to my assigned plot. The work was physical and simple. I knelt and began tying the heavy peony heads to their stakes, my hands moving with practiced ease. The other volunteers were there. Margaret, who grew heirloom tomatoes, and Ben, who focused on medicinal herbs. We exchanged pleasant greetings, then settled into a companionable silence, broken only by the snip of shears and the rustle of leaves. My mind was not on the flowers. It was on a doorstep 5 miles away. I watched the sun climb higher. At approximately 11 o'clock, I paused, wiping my brow with the back of my glove. I imagined a car, nondescript, pulling up to my house, a man or woman in professional attire walking up the brick path, the knock on the door. Gregory would answer, irritated at the interruption. He would see the envelope, thick and official. He would sign the electronic pad, his signature a dismissive scrawl. He would close the door, looking at the return address, Reed and Associates, Family Law. For a moment, his arrogant mind would reject the connection. Then, the cold plunge of understanding. I bent back to my work, turning the soil at the base of the plants. The texture was rich and dark. My phone, my personal one, remained silent in my bag. No frantic calls, no texts. The silence was more telling than any noise. At 12:30, I packed my tools. I said goodbye to Margaret and Ben. "Everything blooming nicely, Victoria," Margaret said, smiling. "It is," I agreed. "With a little care, things usually find a way to grow." I drove home by a slightly longer route, stopping at a farm stand to buy fresh eggs and asparagus. I needed a reason for my lateness, a prop. The brown paper bag sat on the passenger seat. When I turned onto our street, everything looked unchanged. The lawn was tidy. The house sat silent in the afternoon sun. I parked in the garage and entered through the kitchen, the bag of groceries in my arms. The house was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the dense, charged silence that follows an explosion. I set the groceries on the counter. I listened. No sound from his study, no television. I walked through the dining room toward the front of the house. The formal living room was rarely used. The door was closed. As I passed, I heard voices. Low, urgent. Eleanor's voice, sharp and panicked. Gregory's, a strained and bewildered rumble. I did not pause. I continued upstairs. I changed out of my gardening clothes, took a shower, and dressed in clean, casual wear. I took my time. Let them marinate in their shock. Let them read and reread. Let the reality sink in, layer by terrible layer. When I came back downstairs, the living room door was still closed. I went to the kitchen and began putting the eggs away. I filled a vase with water for the asparagus. The ordinary actions were a deliberate counterpoint to the chaos contained behind that door. The phone in my pocket, the old one, vibrated once. A single message from Ms. Reed. Package delivered and signed for at 11:07 a.m. I deleted it. I looked at the closed living room door. The first act was over. The documents were in their hands. The facts were now theirs to confront. My work in the garden was done for the day. Their work, the work of facing the consequences of their own greed and underestimation, had just begun. I would give them time to absorb the full measure of it. There was no need to rush. The law and the truth it now carried was on my side, and it was patient. The murmurs from behind the living room door continued for nearly an hour. I stayed in the kitchen, preparing a simple lunch I had no intention of eating. The sounds were indistinct at first, a low rumble of confusion. Then the tone shifted. Eleanor's voice rose in a sharp, incredulous question. I could not make out the words, only the pitch of alarm, then silence. A long, dead silence. I was wiping down the already clean counter when the living room door finally opened. It was not opened with Gregory's usual decisive motion. It was pulled inward slowly as if the person behind it had lost strength. Gregory stood in the doorway. He was holding several pages of the thick document packet. His face had lost all its color. It was a sickly, waxy white, the skin seeming to cling tightly to the bones beneath. His eyes were wide, fixed on nothing, seeing the words on the pages instead of the room in front of him. He looked like a man who had been physically struck. Eleanor emerged behind him. She was not holding papers. One hand gripped the door frame for support. Her other hand was pressed flat against her chest. Her mouth was a tight, grim line, but her eyes held a wild, frantic energy. The smug triumph was gone, erased completely. They both stood there, frozen, staring into the hallway as if they had forgotten the layout of their own home. Gregory's eyes finally focused, landing on me. He blinked, as though trying to reconcile the woman in the apron with the content of the documents. "Victoria," he said. His voice was hoarse, stripped of its confident timbre. "Yes," I replied, placing the cloth neatly over the faucet. "What is this?" He held the pages out slightly, a trembling gesture. "I couldn't say," I answered calmly. "You received the mail, not I." Eleanor found her voice. It was a thin, reedy sound. "It's from a lawyer, Reed and Associates. It's about divorce." She said the word as if it were a foreign, poisonous term. "Divorce?" I allowed a note of mild, puzzled concern into my voice. "Why would you be served with divorce papers, Gregory?" He took a stumbling step forward. "They're not just papers. They're a lawsuit. A motion for financial exploitation. Emotional distress." He was reading directly from the summary page, his mind struggling to process the legal language into personal reality. "They've frozen everything. The accounts. They filed something on the houses. They're claiming—" He looked down, his eyes scanning, hunting for the worst of it. "They're claiming sole title to the lake property, based on separate asset maintenance. They have records, years of records." Eleanor cut in, her voice gaining a shrill edge. "There's more. There's an attachment, a memorandum." She turned to Gregory, her composure cracking. "It says it's a contemporaneous record of a conversation, dated 3 weeks ago, a Tuesday night." Gregory's head snapped up. The blood that had drained from his face seemed to freeze entirely. His eyes locked with mine, and in them I saw the dawning, horrific comprehension. He remembered the Tuesday night, the study, the scotch, the plan. "It can't be," he whispered. "It is," Eleanor shrilled, pointing a shaking finger at the papers. "It's quoted. It has our words. Too weak to fight back. Drain the accounts. The lake house is the real asset. It's all there. How? How could they know that? Her question hung in the air. They both stared at me, the only possible source. Gregory's expression cycled through confusion, denial, and a rapidly solidifying, chilling certainty. I did not move. I did not change my expression. I simply waited, letting them connect the dots that had been so obvious to me from the beginning. Gregory took another step, the papers crumpling slightly in his grip. "You," he breathed. "You heard us." I said nothing. My silence was confirmation enough. "You wrote it down," he continued, the reality crashing over him. "You went to a lawyer. You've been planning this." The word planning came out as an accusation, as if my strategic response to their conspiracy was the greater crime. Eleanor made a small, choked sound. Her hand tightened on her chest. She looked from the damning pages to my calm face, and her legs seemed to buckle. She half fell, half sank into the hallway chair, a decorative piece that had never been meant to hold actual weight. She sat there, deflated, her earlier vigor replaced by a stunned collapse. Gregory remained standing, but he was unsteady. The color had not returned to his face. The documents in his hand were no longer just papers. They were the blueprint of his downfall, written in the ink of his own words and my meticulous evidence. He saw the financial freeze, the legal claims, the recorded proof of his intent. He saw the future he had planned for me being dismantled and reassembled for my benefit. The living room floor was littered with the rest of the packet, pages fanned out where they had been dropped. The tidy numbered exhibits, the notarized copies of deeds, the printed account histories, all the components of the case I had built lay scattered like debris from an internal explosion. He looked at the mess, then back at me. His arrogance was gone. In its place was a raw, bewildered shock. The assumption he had lived by, too weak to fight back, lay in ruins around him, and he was only beginning to understand the strength that had been quietly arrayed against him all along. The reveal was complete. The consequences had landed, not with a shouted argument, but with the devastating, unanswerable weight of a formal court filing. They were holding their own judgment in their hands. The silence that followed my non-denial was more profound than any noise. Eleanor remained slumped in the hallway chair, her breathing shallow. Gregory stood frozen, the papers a stark white against his colorless hand. The shock held them captive for a long minute. Then it broke. The color rushed back into Gregory's face, a furious, blotchy red. The confusion in his eyes crystallized into a hot, disbelieving rage. He took 2 sharp strides toward me, the papers crumpling further. "You did this? You went behind my back? You set a trap?" "I retained counsel," I corrected, my voice level. "After becoming aware of your plan to dissipate marital assets and fraudulently claim my separate property." "Fraudulently!" He spat the word. "That property is mine as much as yours. I've paid into this household for 20 years. "You have," I agreed, "and the documentation I provided to the court details your contributions alongside mine. It also details the source of the down payment for this home, which was from the sale of my premarital condo. It details the complete financial history of the lake property, maintained solely by me. The court will determine an equitable division of true marital assets. The restraining order ensures those assets remain intact for that division." He stared at me as if I were speaking a foreign language. The legal terminology, delivered in my calm, familiar voice, seemed to enrage him further. "You can't do this. You can't freeze my accounts. I have business expenses, obligations." The order allows for reasonable living expenses and bona fide business costs to be petitioned through the court, I stated. Your attorney, once you engage a competent family law practitioner, can file the necessary motions. Eleanor made a weak sound from her chair. You planned this. You listened and you... I turned my gaze to her. I heard a conversation I was not meant to hear. I recorded its content. I took steps to protect myself from the actions you were planning. The law defines that as prudent, not vicious. That memo, it's just your word. Gregory blustered, grasping at a straw. It's your fabrication. It is a contemporaneous record, noted with date and time. Its validity will be tested against your testimony and your mother's under oath. Do you deny the conversation took place? I asked, looking directly at him. He opened his mouth, then closed it. A sheen of sweat had appeared on his forehead. Denying it outright would be perjury, and he was just lawyer savvy enough to know how dangerous that could be. Admitting it was impossible. He was trapped. You were always so quiet, he said, the anger momentarily drowned in bewildered accusation. You never cared about this stuff, the money, the property. You mistook a lack of contention for a lack of comprehension, I said. I cared for our home. I managed its finances. I preserved my inheritance. You interpreted that management as passivity. It was not. He shook his head, a violent, frustrated motion. All this over a private conversation? A misunderstanding? It was not a misunderstanding. It was a blueprint for my financial destruction. You stated your intent. I have simply believed you. My words were cold, factual. I felt no urge to raise my voice. The power was not in volume. It was in the unassailable truth of what I was saying. He took another step, looming over me. It was an old tactic, using his physical presence to intimidate. I did not step back. I held my ground, looking up at him without flinching. You will withdraw this, he said, his voice dropping into a low, threatening register. You will call this Reed woman and tell her it was a mistake. We will talk this through like reasonable people. There is nothing to talk through, I replied. The matter is now before the court. Any communication regarding the case should be directed to my attorney. Her contact information is in the packet you're holding. His control snapped. He threw the crumpled pages onto the floor. I am your husband. You don't get to shut me out with lawyer talk. You ceased being my partner the moment you and your mother plotted to discard me, I said, my tone finally allowing a sliver of ice to show. You made a business decision. I am now responding in kind. This is no longer a marital discussion. It is a legal process. The finality of the statement hung in the air. He heard it. He finally heard the woman he had underestimated, and the sound of her voice, steady and sure, terrified him more than any scream ever could. The bluster left him. He took an unsteady step back, his eyes darting from my face to the papers on the floor, to his mother's collapsed form. What do you want? He asked, the question stripped of all its former authority. It was just a plea. I have already filed my wants with the court, I said. Full title to my property, an equitable share of the marital estate, a dissolution of our marriage. I paused. And now, I would like you to collect your mother and leave this house for the evening. I need space to think. You're throwing me out of my own house? It is the marital home, subject to the court's jurisdiction. But for tonight, yes, I am asking you to go. You can return tomorrow to collect some belongings. I suggest you secure a hotel and a family law attorney. You have a great deal of reading to do. I turned and walked back toward the kitchen. I did not look back. I heard him stammer my name once, then the sound of him helping Eleanor to her feet, her weak protests. I heard the fumble for keys, the opening of the front door, the click as it closed behind them. The house was silent again, but the silence was different. It was not the quiet of suppression or waiting. It was the silence of a space that was, for the first time in decades, truly and completely my own. I stood in the kitchen, my hands resting on the cool granite. I did not feel triumphant. I felt clear. I had spoken. I had stated the facts. I had claimed my voice, and in doing so, I had reclaimed the ground beneath my feet. The turning was complete. The path ahead was mine to walk. The house was mine alone for 3 days. Gregory returned only once, with a new, harried-looking attorney in tow, to collect suits and personal items. He moved like a stranger in a museum, careful not to touch anything. We did not speak. His attorney handed me a business card and said all communication would now go through him. I placed the card on the hall table and returned to my weeding. That was 6 weeks ago. Now, I kneel in the rich soil of my backyard garden, the morning sun warm on my back. The legal process is not finished. Such things are slow. But its trajectory is set. The temporary orders are now preliminary orders, made permanent by judicial agreement. The lake property is legally recognized as my separate asset, thanks to the decades of documentation. The marital home is on the market, its proceeds to be divided according to a formula that reflects my contributions, both financial and domestic. The accounts remain managed under the court's supervision. Ms. Reed calls it a textbook case of asset preservation. Gregory's attorney, after a few blustered threats, has settled into a posture of grim negotiation. There will be no dramatic trial. There will be a final settlement, fair and binding, born from overwhelming evidence and strategic positioning. I press a new perennial into the hole I've dug, firming the soil around its roots. This section had been neglected, overrun with a particularly stubborn weed. It has taken weeks of consistent work to clear it, to make the ground ready for something new. Victoria, good morning. I look up, shielding my eyes. Mrs. Anderson from 2 doors down is leaning on our shared fence. She is in her 70s, a widow who grows the most spectacular dahlias. Good morning, Jean, I say, getting to my feet and brushing the dirt from my knees. I have to say, she remarks, her eyes kind and knowing, your garden has never looked better. There's a new vitality to it. I've had more time to devote to it recently, I reply. She nods slowly. The neighborhood knows, of course. Divorce is not a quiet event, but the gossip has been respectful, tinged with a surprising amount of sympathy directed toward me. I think people saw the calm determination with which I moved through those first public weeks, and they understood it was not a decision made lightly. Well, it shows, Jean says. It takes a strong hand to bring new life to old soil, and a strong spirit. She gives me a small, supportive smile before turning back to her own yard. Don't forget the garden club meeting next Thursday. I won't, I call after her. I return to my work. Her words linger. A strong spirit. It is not a phrase I would have used to describe myself a few months ago, but I recognize it now. It is not the loud, performative strength Gregory valued in his business world. It is a quieter, deeper resilience, the strength to listen, to plan, to act, the strength to uproot a life that had become poisonous and prepare the ground for something else. My phone, the old one, buzzes in my pocket. A message from Ms. Reed. Final draft of the settlement agreement received from opposing counsel. Terms are within our acceptable parameters. Review at your convenience. We can sign next week. I read it twice. A quiet finality. I type a reply. I will review it this evening. Thank you. I put the phone away. There's no surge of emotion, no shout of victory. There's a deep, settling peace. This was never about vengeance for its own sake. It was about correction. It was about ensuring the price for betrayal was paid in the currency they understood, legal and financial consequence. It was about reclaiming what was mine, not just property, but my agency, my voice, my future. This house will soon belong to someone else. I have already arranged for a property manager to oversee the lake house, to prepare it for my permanent move. I will go there after the sale closes. The cottage needs updating, but its bones are good. The land is peaceful. I can already picture a new garden, planned entirely to my own tastes. I finish planting the last of the perennials and stand back to survey the bed. The plants look small and vulnerable now, but they are firmly rooted. With care, they will grow and fill the space. I gather my tools and carry them to the shed. I wash my hands at the outdoor tap, the cold water clear and clean. As I walk back toward the house, I pause on the patio. I look at the windows, soon to reflect another family's life. I feel no nostalgia, only a sense of completion. The work here is done. Inside, I pour myself a glass of iced tea and sit at the kitchen table. I open my laptop and pull up the email from Ms. Reed with the settlement attachment. I begin to read, my eyes scanning the formal language that spells the end of my marriage and the beginning of my independent life. Each clause is a brick in the foundation of my next chapter. Later, I will call Ms. Reed to discuss the details. Later, I will pack another box of books. Later, I will plan what to plant at the lake house. But for this moment, I simply sit. The sun moves across the kitchen floor. The house is quiet. I am alone, but I am not lonely. I am, for the first time in a very long time, whole. The woman who was assumed to be too weak to fight back is now the woman who has won, not a battle but her own future. And she is ready to live it.